Welcome back to another episode in the series on Cybis Porcelain. To many collectors of fine porcelain, owning a Cybis sculpture is both a privilege and a joy. The excitement of building a unique and private collection is not only personally satisfying, but is often a symbol of prestige when a collection contains rare and unusual items. A significant point the studio emphasized consistently from the earliest days of production is that all sculptures are created and decorated by hand, and therefore no two pieces are ever exactly alike. This statement gave those working in the studio a certain amount of artistic license in creating the fascinating and beautiful works in porcelain that were the finest sculptures ever produced in North America. The carefully communicated statements issued over the years of no two pieces being alike was meant to enrich the value of each sculpture as an individually crafted work of art created with discerning buyers in mind. But these carefully crafted statements also served as more than a disclaimer for the studio. Over the years, numerous variations were created which still surprise and excite collectors today. The studio did not comment on or emphasize any of these anomalies, as many of them were simply not noted. Artists were allowed to make changes where necessary to accommodate mold assembly in the greenware stage and to fix or cover a problem area. This was often done with the use of flowers, lace, decoration, or paint. While such changes may mean the sculpture was no longer the standard issue, these pieces today are sought by collectors looking to acquire unique additions for their private enjoyment. In examining the many variations that have been found to date, it's necessary to first define what an actual variation is when comparing Cybis sculptures. When is a sculpture actually a variation, since all designs are hand-created and individually painted? Any significant deviation from the standard design or color scheme can be considered a variation, while any observable difference could be noted as a variation for collectors. There are primarily two types of variations. There are design variations and color variations, but these two can be broken down even further to include both intentional and unintentional variations. The intentional variations occurred when a piece was redesigned. This often happened because production improvements could be realized by making specific changes. If the redesign was significant enough, the piece would often be given a new design number, with the old design number being retired. One of the best examples of an intentional design variation to consider is the open edition of Heidi in the Children to Cherish collection, introduced in 1962. The initial prototype created was photographed for use in marketing material. This prototype, seen here, shows Heidi standing on a small, thin, round base. Certainly, production problems were immediately experienced with this piece not firing properly in the kiln. It's likely many broke off the base in the first round of firing or had a significant lean factor. To correct this issue, the piece was redesigned, adding a tree stump behind her which lends support and stability. To date, no piece has ever been seen without the tree stump attached. It is unlikely the prototype pictured was ever produced for sale. If any copies were released from the studio without the tree stump, they would be considered extremely rare. Heidi was produced for 11 years and would see other variations. Most notably are color variations. She went from being a brunette to a blonde and saw her flower and leaf decoration simplified. It has also been noted newer pieces have lighter colored shoes. This piece was extremely popular and dealers' orders were high. As a result, the studio made yet another design change to streamline the piece to speed up production. The next variation can be easily missed if only observing Heidi from the front. The tree stump was redesigned with no leaves. The leaves were removed before the color variations were made, as darker hair and shoes can be found on pieces where the stump has no leaves. While a variation of the stump without leaves can be found, it is scarce but not rare. I have two in my personal collection, both with dark hair and dark shoes. In other instances, an entirely separate edition was released with its own design number, name, and unique characteristics, even though it looks suspiciously like an earlier item. These items are not considered variations. This is well illustrated when comparing two Madonnas made from the same mold produced by the Holland Mold Company. Initially released as a full-body sculpture of the Virgin Mary, design number 2091, the Madonna, Our Lady of Lourdes, Healer of the Sick, is found in both color and white bisque. As a side note, this piece holds the record among Cybis sculptures for having the longest name. Most often referred to as Our Lady of Lourdes, she was released in the early 1950s, retired in the late 50s, and is found with intentional design variations in her halo. The same mold was used to create design number 2092. The Madonna Mystical Rose was released in the early 1950s. Mystical Rose was in production until at least 1963, as she is listed on the price list for that year. She was produced in multiple sizes in the full figure sculpture and at least two sizes as a bust. The bust was available with and without roses. For a collector seeking variations, the earliest work from the 1950s offers a treasure trove of opportunities. The studio was continuously making improvements and updating sculptures with more appealing features and colors. Pieces like the Madonna House of Gold can be found in several variations. The Guardian Angel saw numerous color options, base designs, and halo options. But of all the Cybis designs offered, none were recycled as many times as the 7-inch Holland Mold Madonna bust. From this one design, Cybis would offer well over a dozen options in varying sizes, colors, finishes, accent decorations, halos, and base styles. This mold was first put into production in the early 1950s and remained in production in one form or another until the studio ceased operations. This Madonna is without a doubt the longest running design ever. Sizes ranged from 7¼ inches to 13 inches. The first limited edition set of birds produced by Cybis was the 1958 introduction of the Skylarks. Unlike the limited edition Turtle Doves of Peace, released in 1957, the male and female Skylarks were individual sculptures, each mounted on a wood base and issued with matching numbers. The pair was initially released as an edition limited to 750. Later reduced to 350 pairs, the Skylarks were produced until 1970. During this time, both intentional design and color variations occurred. The earliest sets were generally darker, while newer sets were lighter in color and had less detail on the birds' faces and wings. Soon after introduction, the female was redesigned, adding a second green reed in the back. A standard mahogany wood base was used, but unintentional variations have been found with taller bases. Base variations may have resulted due to supplier issues. The colors of the leaves on the male Skylark are also found with variations. When examining color variations, tone and shading should not be considered as long as the color is basically the same. A figure of a girl wearing a dark blue blouse is not a variation over one normally found in lighter blue. There are a few known instances where extreme color variations were released under the same design number. No mention was made of the exception, as such was the case with Cinderella. The standard color was blue, but the studio did later acknowledge releasing between 30 and 35 copies of Cinderella with a rust-colored blouse. A few of the rust-colored pieces have turned up on the secondary market over the years, but what has not been seen is the yellow version. At least 3 copies with the yellow blouse are known to exist. The studio confirmed a minimum number of yellow variations were made, but never confirmed a specific number. Relating to color variations, it should be noted the studio did accept special order requests from customers in which the entire color scheme was changed. These special orders would be considered intentional color variations and considered rare. Another intentional design variation from the 1950s is the Madonna Immaculate Conception, design number 251. This piece exhibits both a strong Papka and Corday influence. The styles developed by Marja Cybis of using curls and ringlets for hair on the Papka designs were carried over into Corday China production and into the earliest Cybis designs. This influence is evident when comparing pieces side by side. Immaculate Conception has additional ringlets added to her hair, lace applied to her sleeves, and flowers on the base, as well as a complete crown of roses. She was redesigned with a new base, making her 17 3/4 inches tall. The new design discontinued the floral adornment at the bottom and was available in various color schemes, including an all-white version. Also removed were the ringlets of hair, allowing for faster production. The new version has open eyes, whereas the older model has her eyes closed. Variations in the floral crown range from all roses to an assortment of various flowers. The longest-running sculpture in the Children to Cherish collection was Wendy, introduced in 1957. This piece is found with minor variations. Hair colors range from dark brown to blonde. The sash tied around her waist will periodically have streams of ribbon not molded to her dress, and older versions seem to demonstrate more motion in the pigtails of her hair as she continues her stride. Wendy's mold was used to create event pieces with minor color and design variations. Each had its own name and design number, so they are not considered variations of the original. These pieces were only available in limited quantities and offered at Cybis dealer gallery events. An introduction from 1983 that demonstrates another design change prior to production is that of David the Shepherd Boy. The prototype was created with the poor little lamb hanging off the base and with the boy's eyes closed. The redesign included raising the hem of David's robe so the lamb could be moved closer to David's feet, and his eyes were redesigned to be open. The base also had a decorative design which was removed prior to production. It's unlikely the prototype version was ever produced for sale. If found, one would be considered rare. I obtained the prototype from the studio when the archives and remaining backstock were liquidated. Studio publications state Beatrice was created in commemoration of the 700th anniversary of Dante's birth in 1265. The 1965 introductions of Juliet, Beatrice, and Hamlet were all sculptures released that year as part of the Portraits in Porcelain collection. Like the other two introductions of Juliet and Hamlet, Beatrice is known to have minor color variations. However, of the three, she is the only one known to have a design variation. An extremely rare example of Beatrice with lace decoration does exist. To date, this is the only copy with lace to have been found. This sculpture of Beatrice is number 328, indicating she was produced near the middle of the production cycle of 750 copies. Why this copy was produced with the additional lace decoration is unknown. It is possible this item was a special order the studio created to fill a customer request. One of the earliest Cybis religious pieces produced was the 10.5-inch tall Child of Prague, first issued as design number 44. This piece would later be reissued as design number 247. This sculpture is not to be confused with the limited edition 22-inch tall Holy Child of Prague, design number 250, released in 1956. It is likely the Child of Prague was discontinued at the time the Holy Child of Prague was released to avoid any confusion between the two, since the names were similar. Several color variations and design variations exist between the earlier and later models, but most notable are the lace decorations. The earliest items have the lace on his sleeves draping downward from the wrists. The inside of his cape is painted light pink, and the gold decorations on the crown are more detailed. Later editions would have the lace reversed, displaying a stiffer, starched effect. The inside of his cape is plain white, and his crown is less ornate. Adding even more interest to the concept of this theme was a third child titled Miniature Infant of Prague, design number 2145, which is known to have variations on his base. Released in the mid-1950s, the patron saint of Ireland, St. Patrick, was issued as design number 263 and measures 12 inches tall. He was later reissued as design number 2514 after having been slightly enlarged. The new design, now 13.5 inches tall, would stand on a 1-inch tall porcelain base, and the color scheme was enriched with darker tones and old coin gold accents. St. Joseph, design number 203, was initially issued holding one lily. His redesign included a second lily and darker colors and additional old coin gold accents. The redesign did not receive a new design number, but a second St. Joseph holding the child Jesus was also in production around the same period and is found mounted on a porcelain base, making him considerably taller. Unintentional variations are found primarily on the oldest pieces when the studio was less strict in requiring staff to follow the artist's proofs. These variations were common, vary widely, and are regularly being discovered as more of the earliest sculptures are sold on the secondary market. A good example is the 1950 sculpture of St. Francis. Originally released on a small round base with floral decorations, he was updated and released as design number 2085. The redesign included a much larger base with the addition of 2 sheep and redesigned doves. The doves were also repositioned with one at his feet, another near his waist, and one on his shoulder. Out of the 5 copies found to date, 4 have the dove on his shoulder positioned with its head looking down toward the other doves. One of the copies in my collection has the bird positioned in the opposite direction. This is an unintentional variation, as all others would seem to indicate the standard production should have the bird facing in the downward position. Another oddity not in keeping with the standard version are the ears and noses on the sheep. One lone sheep has the edges of his ears outlined in black and a solid black nose, while the other sheep all have similar ears and the same nose. These variations demonstrate the artists creating each sculpture were allowed to make minor changes as desired or necessary. In later years, the rules were tightened to ensure production standards were in line with the advertising material used to promote Cybis sculptures. The Cybis Nativity murals were produced primarily using molds purchased from the Atlantic Mold Company. The nativity sets were comprised of 8 sculptures, each constructed from as many as 6 components when counting the base. Once the major components were assembled, additional decoration was added in the form of plants and ground cover. The murals were produced for several years during the 1950s, but exact dates are not known. During this time, intentional design variations would include changing the bases from convex with bas-relief to plain concave designs. The Holy Family mural would also see the manger and baby Jesus redesigned from a single molded unit to 2 pieces with a dove attached overlooking the Christ child. Minor differences in positioning of the nativity components would not be considered variations. However, unintentional variations have been found, specifically with the shepherd bearing gifts, design number 2109. The catalog photographs of this piece show a goat next to the kneeling shepherd and 2 fir trees. The tree on the right has a dove landing near the top. There were 2 trees used on this sculpture, one thinner tree and one fuller tree, which have varied on all 4 copies I've seen. Of the 2 sets in my collection, the color set is like the picture in the catalog. However, the white set has no dove on the tree behind the shepherd, and the goat has been replaced with a sheep. This was certainly an unintentional design variation. It's likely the artist assembling the components made an error, or the studio was running short on doves and goats that day, so they did the best they could with what was on hand. It's probably a sure bet, as more examples of the murals are found, additional variations such as these will be noted. In 1963, the studio issued design number 427, titled Springtime, as part of the Children to Cherish collection. She was retired in 1969, but not before seeing at least one significant color variation and a later minor design variation. Initially issued as a blonde, Springtime became a brunette and saw the colors of the flowers and leaves in her lap simplified. The position of her hand and arm would be slightly raised in later models, moving her hand closer to her shoulder, allowing the artists easier access when painting the bow under her collar. No blondes have ever been found with her hand in the elevated position. Another Madonna from the mid-1950s, the Annunciation, design number 2118, was also a Holland mold design purchased by the studio. She can be found in several intentional color and design variations. The earliest version was introduced with a wood halo. Later, she would be offered with no halo and subsequently with a floral crown of roses. This piece has been found in the sepia finish, the stained glass finish, and white glaze. The later rose crown version, released prior to retirement in 1965, was available in white bisque or in color in the matte finish. Perhaps the most interesting variations the studio produced are a pair of busts released in the early 1950s. Though sold separately, catalogs indicate they were introduced as a pair. Initially released as wall plaques, the base of each plaque was flat, allowing them to stand alone. Depicting Jesus and the Virgin Mary, the sculpture titles were assigned as Son of Justice for Christ and Mirror of Justice for Mary. Mary was assigned design number 254 and Christ was assigned number 255. Each bust measures approximately 11 inches tall. As with most of the religious items released during this era, the two were produced from molds the studio obtained elsewhere. At this time, it's unknown what mold company produced the two busts or if they were even produced by the same mold company. No details have been uncovered to date relating to Mary, but the original sculptor who designed Christ was an Italian artist, Richard Arilli, born in 1834 and having died in 1914. The bust was produced as a limited edition in bronze by a casting house in Belgium, but was reproduced in a variety of media by other vendors. The bust was modified from its original design, making it either a wall or tabletop item. Cybis offered the pair in white bisque, white glaze, in color using the stained glass finish, and sepia, the studio's brown tone finish used in the early 1950s. The pair would be redesigned, mounting them on wood bases and giving them wood halos, boosting their overall size to 17 inches. The only copies found to date have been in the stained glass finish. While the wall plaques have been found with the fourth Cybis signature stamped in pink, the 17-inch versions seemed so far to have had labels attached with the Cybis stamp and design numbers. Both sets in my collection have the incised eagle mark on the back of the bust of Christ, while Mary is unmarked. From the back, the hole created for hanging is clearly seen on the plaques and can be seen through the teakwood halos of the redesigned sets. An obvious unintentional design variation can be found on both pieces of some of the redesigned busts. This variation is actually not on the porcelain sculptures. It exists on the teakwood halos. The studio's entire production of porcelain took place in Trenton, New Jersey. However, the studio did make use of outside sources for non-porcelain items such as wood bases, teakwood halos, and the glass display cases known as vitrines, which were offered in the 1970s. It was surprising, to say the least, to find the backs of the teakwood halos used on this pair with the country of origin clearly marked as India, an initial oversight the studio would correct once discovered. The halo components were actually teakwood trivets attached to the backs of each bust. These trivets were produced in India and marked with a part number and the country name by pressure stamping the wood. It's unknown how many of the redesigned busts were marked this way, but later sets are found with the halos having the stamped letters and numbers ground down and sanded off. The studio surely would not have wanted someone unfamiliar with Cybis products to assume these sculptures had been produced in India. In later years, the studio would begin marking products with USA, Made in Trenton, New Jersey, Made in USA, and other derivatives of that to prevent any possible doubt. These sets are considered rare, even in less than mint condition, and sets marked India would be highly valued by any serious collector. In the early 1990s, the studio introduced the Hall of Fame collection. This was a new collection of older pieces in smaller sizes with color and minor design variations. The collection was released to commemorate the upcoming 100th anniversary of Boleslaw Cybis's birth in 1895. These pieces were introduced with new design numbers and names to differentiate from the original pieces, which had all been retired. An example is the boy head, design number 5075. Nearly identical to his predecessor, Head of Boy, design number 435, released in 1963, the new design is a full 2 inches shorter, measuring just 7 3/4 inches tall. The original bust was on a wood base, while the new bust is on a porcelain base painted black. All Hall of Fame sculptures were marked with the later Cybis hallmarks and 8th Cybis signature. While other known variations exist, many of which have already been covered in previous videos, I hope this episode has provided a good overview of the types of variations a collector can expect to find. I trust you have enjoyed the content and invite you to subscribe to this channel to receive notifications as new videos are released. For additional information on the web about Cybis Porcelain, visit the Cybis Archive at cybisarchive.com. While not affiliated with this YouTube channel, the archive has in-depth articles about Cybis Porcelain and the studio's history, which I'm sure you will enjoy. Thank you for joining me, and I hope you will watch the complete series on Cybis Porcelain. I look forward to sharing more with you in upcoming videos as we continue to explore Cybis, the most exciting porcelains ever created in the United States.